All right, so a couple of days ago, Marianne Williamson officially announced her 2024 candidacy and attempt to primary President Joe Biden. Now, already, we have seen just an absolute avalanche of smears coming out of corporate media where they are trying to say, oh, she's not serious, this isn't a serious contender, we shouldn't pay any attention to her, we should basically just be trying to do a media blackout because Joe Biden deserves this position, he's earned this position, and so nobody should be paying attention to Marianne or any of the substantive policy disagreements that she has with the current president. Now, on top of all of those smears coming from the mainstream press, we have now gotten an addition to that in the form of Karine Jean-Pierre, Joe Biden's press secretary, who is going to come out and literally laugh at the idea, along with these corporate stooges in the crowd here, laugh at the idea that people should even talk about or debate some of the things that Marianne Williamson is trying to run on. So let's just go ahead and watch this clip real quick.
Is the president annoyed, frustrated with Marianne Williamson for jumping in the race ahead of him? Did he want a clear field to run against the Republican nominee in 2024?
Just not tracking that. I mean, if I had a what is it called? A little globe here, crystal ball, then I can tell you. But I imagine 8-ball, whatever. If I can feel her aura, I just don't have any. I just don't have anything to share on that. Gosh, you guys are making me laugh now.
Okay, so again, this is what they think of you. This is what they think of democracy. They think it is literally laughable. Now, first of all, obviously, again, you have not only Karine Jean-Pierre who's making this joke and trying to make fun of, Marianne Williamson's spirituality, which is like, first of all, I'm an atheist, right? I don't believe in, spirituality or religiosity in pretty much any way, shape, or form. But the idea that you're going to sit up there and pretend as if something that Marianne Williamson has talked about previously with spirituality and how that guides her philosophical framework or something like that is so radically different and more ridiculous and more laughable than any other religion, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam. It's all made up nonsense for the most part. So the idea you're going to sit up there and sneer at somebody else's interpretation of their own, spiritual, framework or something like that, that in and of itself is just absolutely laughable, right? Not in the way that they're laughing at it, but laughable that you would have the audacity to pretend as if you're like holier than thou, no pun intended. But then on top of that, I mean, obviously what she's saying here as the press secretary of, the president of the United States is obviously just her trying to cover Joe Biden's tracks and his failures as the president, right? They do not want to even give a single inch to the idea, the notion that somebody might have good points to be making about some of the failures of the Joe Biden administration. Now, it's not unexpected to be coming from the press secretary for the United States, whose basically entire job is to go out there and try to lie to the media, lie to the world on behalf of the president, right, and try to do propaganda on behalf of the president. That's kind of Karine Jean-Pierre's entire job. So it's one thing coming from her. It's a different thing also coming from members of the media who are sitting in the audience and laughing along with her. I mean, you guys heard that clip right there, right? Literally cackling, okay? Verbally, audibly laughing in the crowd at Marianne Williamson's campaign, while your job in the media is supposed to be to hold the most powerful people and institutions and corporations accountable. That's your job. It's to be a check on these people, like the press secretary, right? It's not to laugh along with them in your little club of elites where you scoff at the idea that somebody else might have different policy positions that could benefit the overwhelming majority of working class Americans in this country. Now, Marianne responded to this, and she put together a video here that I'll link down below, and she was basically, showing her disappointment and how ridiculous that clip was. And she says that they might think that it's a joke, but there's nothing amusing about people going bankrupt from medical debt or children going to bed hungry. Now, specifically on these 2 points, Joe Biden, first of all, was somebody who ran a campaign in 2020 saying that he would veto Medicare for all, even if it passed through the House and the Senate. Okay, so that's his healthcare policy. Now, he's made some, marginal steps in the right direction when it comes to Medicare, negotiating some drug prices for seniors and things like that, right? But he's not willing to challenge the power of corporate America, certainly not the health insurance corporations, who at least in large part helped to fund his presidency in the first place. So that would be a substantive disagreement. Marianne Williamson believes in true universal healthcare through a single-payer Medicare for all type healthcare system, right? She also says children going to bed hungry. Yeah, how do you get up there and laugh in front of the world at, believing in this notion that you guys have done everything right, you guys deserve to be in the position that you're in right now, where there are still children going to bed hungry? And this isn't just some amorphous, concept that she's talking about, or a complicated socioeconomic, a principle that we're talking about here with children going hungry. We saw the implications of, for example, the child tax credit, right? We signed a law, the child tax credit, along with a couple other policies as well, that effectively reduced child poverty in this country by 40%, close to a half, cutoff point from child poverty. And then what did they do? They just turned around and let that policy expire, okay? You had corrupted Republicans joining up with some corporate Democrats. They let that policy die. Remember, Joe Manchin was going around and talking about, mothers, instead of spending this on their kids, they're going to go out and spend it on drugs or some other nonsense made up bullshit like that, right? And then they allowed millions of children to be plunged back into poverty. How do you take yourself seriously when you weren't willing to take on that fight with members of your own party and the opposition party in order to prevent children from going hungry? So listen, there's so many different other actual policy disagreements we could talk about between Marianne Williamson and Joe Biden, but we don't get to have those conversations within corporate media or within the upper echelons of the DC elite class, because they just laugh at it. Not even just, again, laughing at the idea of somebody posing a challenge to Biden, but laughing at the idea that you should even debate this person or have a conversation with this person. So make no mistake about it, this is going to be their strategy moving forward with Marianne Williamson. Okay, they are going to try to do a media blackout similar to what they tried to do to Bernie Sanders at the very beginning of the 2020 primary before he picked up a bunch of steam and actually ended up winning the first couple of contests, right? That was the media strategy back then for Bernie as well. Let's just not talk about him. Let's just, brush him off as being unserious, not a legitimate contender for this position. Now, it may be true that she has an extremely unlikely chance at actually defeating Joe Biden and becoming the president, but that's not for you to decide, okay? That's not for you in the, corporate media to decide whether or not people should want to vote for this person. Your job is to outline, what does she believe in? What are her policy positions? How does that differ from Joe Biden? What has Joe Biden accomplished? You can talk about his accomplishments and his failures, lay it out for the American people in an open and honest way, and then have that discussion, and then the American people can decide and make up their mind, who do they want to support? Now, listen, on top of all of that, right, on top of all of the different policy disagreements, they also sit up here and act as if, the American people overwhelmingly want Joe Biden to run again. I mean, we can look at the polling data on this, right? So this is just from last year. They say most Americans say they either do not want Joe Biden or Donald Trump to run for president again in 2024. And in fact, when you're talking about the total American population, the majority of Americans don't want either of them to run. You can look at Joe Biden here. Only 23% of U.S. adults want him to run. 23%. Okay, now you might look at that poll and say, oh, well, that includes, independents and Republicans. Of course, they're not going to want him to run. Let's look at the Democrats, okay? Most Democrats don't want Biden to seek a second term, poll says. A majority of Democrats now think one term is plenty for President Joe Biden, despite his insistence that he plans to seek re-election in 2024. That's according to a new poll from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research that shows just 37% of Democrats say they want him to seek a second term, which is down from 52% in the weeks before last year's midterm elections. Okay, so this was even after Democrats did relatively better than expected in the midterms, and you had a drop-off in his support down to 37%. This isn't Republicans, this isn't independents, this isn't the overall, population of the United States. This is 37% of Democrats want him to run to seek re-election. The overwhelming majority of Democrats don't want this guy again, okay? And again, they're not even willing to have that conversation. They're getting up there on their high horse and acting as if it's all done, it's all settled. Joe Biden earned this, he deserves to be in this position. Anybody else who's posing a challenge, they're just a complete and utter joke. And you look at the polling data and it's well, clearly something is going wrong here if an overwhelming majority of the members of Joe Biden's own party don't think he should run again. Now, maybe you have different varying reasons for why some people don't want him to run. Maybe some people think, he's just old, he's not necessarily all there, maybe that's why he shouldn't run again. But there are also a huge contingent of people who want somebody who is actually going to aggressively fight for a bold left-wing economic platform similar to what Marianne Williamson is attempting to do. So, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, you could have disagreements with Marianne. I'm sure I disagree with her on, many different policies. She's not a perfect candidate. She's not a perfect person. Nobody is. But if we're talking about the prospects for 2024, number one, there's not really that many other semi-left-wing people who are even willing to get into the this race. Certainly there's not going to be any, other elected members of Congress. I actually just saw a report from a couple of days ago showing that the Congressional Progressive Caucus, being led by Pramila Jayapal, is already trying to rally behind Joe Biden's candidacy, not giving a word to Marianne Williamson before Joe Biden has even announced his run for re-election officially. Okay, so that's where the Congressional Progressive Caucus is at right now with their position. Okay, and so you have this layout where, the American people don't want Trump or Biden to run. Okay, you have potential chances for Republicans like Ron DeSantis or any of these other ones to maybe have a chance against Donald Trump. And then you have one contender against Joe Biden who they're just basically completely disregarding and aren't even willing to let into the conversation. So the lesson I take away from this is, we need to step up our game even further, right? If you are a semi-supporter of Marianne Williamson's campaign, if you, have critiques from a left-wing perspective of the Joe Biden campaign or the Joe Biden presidency, then throw your support behind Marianne Williamson, because certainly, given the landscape of corporate media, how they are going to be covering this or not covering her run for 2024, and also given how the Biden administration is just refusing to even entertain the idea of even having substantive policy debates about their disagreements with Marianne Williamson, we are going to have to step in and fill that gap.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying